Well, I think we'll kick things off. I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay and can see the screen. If anyone can't, please sort of raise some hands or make a point on the screen there. So, as Katrina quite kindly said, I'm Kevin Lee, Sales Director at Amillan, and I'm just going to run through a brief agenda to start with. I'm going to do some quick introductions. I'm going to give you a short overview on Amillan itself, talk a little bit about our capability, and I'm going to pass then over to our key partner from PolyAI, and Adam King's going to run through the PolyAI solution, which I'm sure you'll find of interest. So really, who are we? This is Amillan. So Amillan, we're an MSP or a managed service provider with a long history in delivering services. We've been around nearly 40 years and started off in the early days of traditional voice services and have moved through that spectrum of change over the years to where we are today, where we're talking more around AI rather than traditional voice services. We build everything on our expertise. We've got a lot of key practices around the businesses, which I'll come over and talk through in a short while. And we build everything around our customer services, and we've got a very strong customer base out there, ranging both across the public sector and private sector. Organisations that we've looked after for many years, such as Wimbledon, and some key universities along the lines of things like Cardiff University and many others. A lot of local government, central government, and some key organisations in the private sector as well, which we can certainly introduce people to from a reference capability in the future. We're very focused and very service driven, so we look at bringing best of breed solutions to the market and being able to work with you as an organisation to really provide things that meet the business needs of your organisation today. And we are flexible. We're not a huge organisation, which allows us to sort of bespoke and tailor solutions to meet our individual customers and their customer needs. So on the back of that, we're also very committed to our customer services, and our relationships with our customers tend to be long term, and we focus on building a single team, one view, and working with yourselves as an organisation to bring that correct ethos together. So our code capability is built around 4 key pillars within the business. The first one being networking. So we do a lot within local area networks, wireless local area networks, and the security areas around that. And again, we built up initially from a cabling background, from cabling infrastructure, both wired, copper, fibre, etc., and also the network services that's driven around that from the early days of analog ISDN to today's SIP. And then looking at SD-WAN capability as we move forward. The second pillar was really built around our unified communications piece, which came from traditional TDM and IP telephony into UC. We have a strong Microsoft practice around Microsoft Teams, and we deliver a lot of unified communications as a service, and especially with a key partner of ours in that area around Evolve with the Microsoft solutions. And a contact center, traditional was always on premise. As we know, a lot of stuff has moved into the cloud now, so we're doing a lot of contact center as service solutions. And then finally, probably brings us on to the AI piece that we're talking about today. We see AI has moved very heavily in the contact center space, and with a number of organizations moving away from more conversational to a more generative AI, which we'll cover a little bit further in the presentation this morning. And a key point here is the World Wide Web has been around for probably about 25, 26 years now, and cloud strategy or cloud first strategy was something that everyone started to push to probably about 10 years ago, has now got to the point where it's expected that AI will be bigger than both of those as we move forward into the next sort of 10, 20 years. So it's interesting fact how big AI is going to affect us all and all our lives. It really brings us to the point where we're starting to see a shift in the market, and talk a little bit about paradigm shifts and what they are. But really, this is about change, and we're seeing how the market is moving, how people are now starting to accept things like AI and use that in everyday life. We're seeing people using things like Chat GPT or Copilot, that form of AI, and we're seeing it in every form of life that we look at today, where AI is just has a presence in everything that we do, from driving a car to sort of catching a bus. There's some form of AI and technology. And it really starts to make an effect on the way we think and the change that everyone's having to accept. So this paradigm shift, I think, is here, and we have to move with it. And it affects, things that are relevant to all of us in reality. The first is the way your customers want to contact you has changed. Previously it was they wanted to do certain things in certain ways. We're now seeing that they're accepting things like AI and being able to automate processes in different ways. 10 years ago, we wouldn't have seen this, and they wouldn't have allowed customers wouldn't deal in that sort of format on those sort of technologies. But we're seeing that change, and that change is really starting to take hold and happen. I think the solutions and the service that you're offering out to your customers are always on. That's changed. We no longer live in that 9 to 5 type environment, and that's moved on to a 24/7, 365 days a year type service that we need to offer. And AI really fits into that area that, we don't have to have physical people, physical bodies. We can use AI to deliver that 24/7 type services. And customers work different today. Your customers are working in more of a hybrid world. They're working as much at home as probably they are in their office environment. So we need to tailor the solutions that we offer and the services that we give in a different way to that hybrid way of working. And I think, on the back of that, the work-life balance has changed. So we need to take that into consideration as we move forward into this space. And really, just to finish off my points on this, if the challenges we face with our customers, don't scare us, then it's probably not that important. So something we just really need to consider as we move forward and look at the services that we offer to our customers at that point. So on that note, unless there's any questions, or please just IM them and put them through. I'm going to hand over to Adam, who's going to take us through the PolyAI piece, which is, I think, the bit that you're all wanting to see this morning, and maybe see some examples of that. So Adam, over to you. And
yeah, great. Thanks for the introduction, Kevin. So my name's Adam King. I'm from a company called PolyAI, and I'm here today to talk to you about sort of making AI a bit more real, right? I think we've all heard, and we're probably all sick to the back teeth of hearing the word AI over and over again. And it seems that over the last 2 years, it's been this huge sort of hype engine. But what I'm going to hopefully show you today is it is real. There's stuff out there that's currently delivering huge ROI in the contact center space. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we build what we build, the way that we think about building virtual assistants with AI, and play you an example as well, so you can hear what our system sounds like as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share a screen. Just bear with me one moment, and hopefully that's popping up now in front of you. So so here at PolyAI, we build what we call the world's most lifelike voice AI, and you're going to have the chance to hear that in a moment. But what does that mean? Well, it means that we're delivering a brand experience, right? So every enterprise that we work with, they're designing a voice experience that works for their customers, that speaks in the terminology that they would use within their contact center, whether that is more formal, whether it's more casual, maybe it's using terminology that's specific to that business. What that allows us to do is achieve really accurate resolution and sort of work in a way that customers don't fear engaging with the AI. They actually are encouraged to have the conversations, to get their problems resolved by the automation without the need to wait in really long hold queues or to speak to somebody in the contact center. So this is going to be a huge generalization, but just to give you a bit of an insight, I speak to contact center leaders every day, and these are the sorts of things that we hear, right, when we go out. And everybody's under pressure to reduce their costs. They're finding it more and more difficult to hire and retain not just staff, but the right staff, the people with the right skills. To to get over those things like seasonal demand, right? We're in the middle of Q4 at the moment for most retail organizations. This is the busiest period they'll have all year. We're helping people to answer calls quickly, which is keeping their missed calls down, it's keeping their abandonment down, and reducing their speed to answer. And of course, when we're talking to people, very often, it's not always the case, but I think Kevin went through there some of the way that the technology has moved on, and some people out there are not as far along on those migrations as others. So we are often talking to people that are still trying to sort of get value out of these perhaps older on-premise systems. Perhaps they haven't made that jump to the cloud yet. Maybe they are using more legacy tech. Well, together with our partner at Amillan, we can help to bring people forward. So we can get them up onto the cloud. We can get them using more modern SIP telephony, for example. But then instead of putting a basic IVR in there, we can go ahead and build something that's truly conversational. And that's what we'll get into in a moment. So if we jump into this phrase, right, this is one of my least favorite phrases. Your call is very important to us. It's probably a close second to we're busier than usual right now. And if you've got that in your IVR, please remove it, honestly. Everybody's had these, we're really busy, your call's really important. Great. That's kind of, as a caller, as a customer, it's not that reassuring to me, right? And I think this led to this perception gap. And one of the things that I found really interesting, there was a survey done last year of contact center leaders and customer experience leaders, and they were asked, how many of you think that your customer service would be rated good or higher by your customers? And 86% of people said, I think we would be rated good or better by our customers. And the actual number when those companies' customers were asked was in the 50s, right? So we see this huge gap between what people think they're delivering from a customer service and what they're actually delivering. And that obviously then turns into poor CSAT, poor NPS, and those horrible wait times, those queues that we talked about earlier on. So what do we do about it? Well, if you think about it, there's this journey that we've been on as an industry, right? Whether it was moving to keypad IVRs that have been knocking about for half a century at this point, to do this press 1, to do this press 2, moving through into those, please tell me the name of the department that you'd like to speak to type speech recognizer type models, and then through to perhaps some of the more complex, can you tell me in a few words why you're calling today type interactions. Those have got us to a point. They lead to a lot of misroutes. They don't use really a lot of the power that modern day computation can provide to answer queries. They just kind of route, and they're pretty good at that, but they're not providing a huge amount of value in terms of actually answering anybody's question, right? And conversational AI came along, probably been around in one form or another for about 10 years now, where we're trying to get into more flow-based understanding of queries and answers. But it's all fallen short a little bit, and we believe as Poly that this is because these conversations haven't been customer-led, and they haven't been lifelike enough for people to want to engage with the automation. So that's kind of where we come in, and we build what we call, as I said, the world's most lifelike voice AI. But that's enough of me talking about it. What I'll do is I'll play you an example call. This is a call from one of our production deployments, and you'll hear what a PolyAI voice AI can sound like. So I'm going to share that now, and hopefully you can hear this.
Cafe Bridge Portsmouth, how can I help you today?
Hi there. Can I book a table for 1:30 this coming Sunday for 4 people?
Let me just have a look at what space we have. Okay. We have a table on the 24th of July at 1:30 p.m. for 4 people. Is that all okay for you?
Yeah, that's great.
Great. Shall I go ahead and book that in for you?
Please do.
Can I have your full name, please?
Yep, my full name is Emily Schaefer.
Can you spell your last name for me?
Sure thing. It's Schaeffer, Schaefer.
Can we reach you on this number?
Yes, you can.
Perfect. I'm just waiting to see that go through, and that's done. Is there anything else that you need to let me know? Any allergies or other notes that I should make on your booking?
Yeah, someone in the group is celiac. Can you make a note of that, please?
We cater the dietary requirements, but all our food is prepared in the same kitchen. I'm just making a note on your booking now, but please remind someone from our team when you get here.
Yep, I can do that.
Is there anything else I can help you with?
I think that's everything. Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
So for some of you on the call, that might be the first time that you've heard one of our virtual assistants in practice. And what I'll say about this is every one of our customers creates a unique voice along with us, right? So this is the voice that was chosen by this customer. But when you build a virtual agent with PolyAI, you have a lot of control over that voice. So that could be, do I want a male voice, a female voice? Maybe I want them to sound older, younger. I mentioned earlier on formality, especially important in some languages, for example, in German, where you might want to use a completely different format of response dependent on the formality that you're going for. So there's a lot of really interesting sort of linguistic choices that you get to make when building out these virtual agents. So what you just heard there probably sounds really, really simple, right? So what you heard was the bot opens up the conversation with, how can I help? It listens for some caller input. You go, I want to make a booking, great. Transcribe that, we recognize that. We run it through a process of understanding, we generate a response, and we send that back down as voice output, right? Really, really easy, right? But in reality, there's a lot of complexity that fits behind that, and the reason that I always want to highlight this is there's a lot of that stuff that sounds deceptively simple, that if you get it wrong, you lose trust almost immediately with the caller. And when you've lost the trust with the caller, their reaction is typically to say, can you put me through to a human being, please? Can you transfer me? I don't want to talk to you. Obviously, what that then does is it doesn't solve any of those problems that we had up at the start, right? It doesn't solve for the call abandonment. It still makes the phone ring in the restaurant in this case. So we want to be able to be good enough that the human being will engage with us. We're not trying to trick people into thinking that they're speaking to a human, but we're trying to help them forget that they're talking to a robot. So let's drill down into this a little bit. Why do a lot of voice AI deployments fail, right? We talk to people all the time that have maybe tried to build something themselves, right? Maybe they've taken some of the sort of off-the-shelf APIs and tried to build something, integrate it with their phone system, which is easier said than done. And maybe they've had a go, put something live, and it's answering 5-10% of calls successfully. Why is that? Well, actually, our data shows that most of these deployments fail because actually nothing to do with the LLM, nothing to do with the responses that are being given, but actually a huge amount of misunderstanding of what people are actually saying in the first place. And if we think about a chat channel, right, if we think about SMS, WhatsApp, web chat, we don't have to worry about the fact that somebody might have an accent or they might be speaking a language that isn't their first language. We have lots of other things we have to worry about when we're over the phone. So we have to worry about poor signal. We have to worry about background noise. Maybe somebody's on a hands-free kit while they're driving along on the motorway and they're trying to have a conversation with you. So speech recognition is really, really hard over the phone. And this is a problem that people have been sort of trying to solve for many, many years now. The joke is that it's kind of a bit like nuclear fusion. It's always just a couple of years away, and we'll have this perfect understanding of everybody's spoken word, but we're not there yet, and I don't think we'll be there for a very long time. So what we have to do is run some models over the top of that help us to take what we have understood from what somebody said and fill in the gaps. Right? I've got a few examples here on the right-hand side. I'll just run through these. If we think about one of the things we very often have to do in the contact center, it's to ask somebody who they are, confirm who they are. Maybe you need to ask them for their mother's maiden name. Maybe it's their date of birth. Maybe it's their postcode. These sort of DPA or ID&V processes. Names are really hard, right? If somebody's called Adam, that's pretty straightforward. If somebody's called Alan, is that one L? Is that two L's? We get into a lot of complexity very, very quickly. Then we start to take into the fact that people move around the world, right? So we end up with people who are using names in the UK that are not particularly common, maybe. And we still need to be able to deal with that. So we need the bot to be intelligent enough to fall back to, can you spell that out for me? Can you confirm what you just said type responses. Really, really important if we want to get that ID&V part down. Contextual recognition is hugely, hugely important to what we do as well. And this is where we use a technique called ASR biasing to actually inform the speech recognizer of the sorts of inputs that we're expecting. So again, the AI can, for example, booking a table, knows it needs to ask somebody, how many people is that for? If the response that we get back is the word hate or the word tree, then it's probably the number 8 or the number 3, right? And we can use the context of where we are within the conversation to sort of error correct for any sort of mistranslated or mistranscribed words. Another favorite of mine is alphanumerical parsing. I don't know if anybody else does this, but I find that I'm a bit of a nightmare when I forget what the correct sort of NATO alphabet letter is for something while I'm on a call, and I'll just make one up, right? So instead of saying alpha, you might find that somebody says A for apple while they're giving you a readout. Well, again, we need the AI to be intelligent enough to be able to deal with that, to understand what somebody means here. And that's super, super important in the UK, where we have a huge amount of alphanumerical input. So things like vehicle registrations, postal codes, really, really important that we understand those things. And then finally, one of the things that makes PolyAI as powerful as it is that we use actually a multiple recognizer system. So what that means is that we can actually ask multiple speech recognizers what they think they just heard within the last sentence that was uttered by the caller. And what we can then do is score them against each other. So for a certain accent in a certain language, for a certain person, maybe a certain recognizer will be performing best. And we can again use that sort of combination of that with the contextual recognition to actually really, really get an understanding of what somebody was most likely to have said, given the inputs that we received. So again, if we're talking to somebody about a banking scenario, they've probably lost their card rather than car, but those words might be very, very linguistically similar. So a lot of challenges with voice, right? And kind of this point is a lot of it's around the recognition. And that's where we focus a huge, huge amount of our time when building out these conversational AIs. So to do that, we've got our own proprietary voice stack. So we use a combination of our own technology as well as some off-the-shelf components, but the vast majority of what we're doing now is using a proprietary voice stack. And that stack is doing all manner of things like model evaluation. It's doing the contextual work that we've just talked about. It's customizing a lexicon. So if we are within a particular industry, we have certain terminology that we expect to come up more than others. We can make sure that those terms are built in there. They might not be in the standard models. They could be product names that we've made up. They could be things that are super unique to us, and we want to make sure that they're built in there as well. Within voice as well, we also have the things that humans do, like interrupt each other, to barge, to maybe take a breath halfway through a sentence, which might trick the caller into thinking that trick the bot into thinking that the caller's finished talking. So we need to be really, really clever on how we detect all of these things. And of course, when we're then responding, we want to make sure we're using those brand voices that we talked about. We're keeping the latency down wherever possible, and that we're putting the right intonation and right empathy within those responses as well. So when somebody is when we're telling somebody that they've won a prize, then we want to sound totally different to when we're consoling somebody who's reporting a fault or reporting a complaint. So all of these things, super, super important. And by owning the end-to-end voice stack, we're able to really customize those things. But of course, it wouldn't be a talk about AI without mentioning the large language model. This has been probably the biggest change within conversational AI in the last sort of 2 years, maybe a little bit longer. We've been working with some form of LLM or transformer model since about 2019, but we've typically, up until the last couple of years, seen people use it only to understand what people are talking about. And I think where generative AI has really come in more recent time is in allowing the bot to customize responses, to allow it to take knowledge from that knowledge base, but tweak it ever so slightly in terms of generating the response, because the caller has asked a question in a certain way. So it's really, really powerful when it comes to taking what could be quite long knowledge base information and really, really drilling down into that little nugget of information that's useful to answer that caller's query. One of the other things that we've seen with bringing in LLMs is that we're able to customize responses really down to a huge degree of personalization. So I've used an example from a company that I was working with recently where somebody called in to ask for their name to be changed on their account because they just got married. And the sort of more defined flow is, okay, sure, I can take you through changing your name. Can you authenticate? Can you go through this process with me? Fine, we can do all of that. But what we can do with an LLM is we can say, hey, is there anything we want to customize in this response based on the context of the conversation that we've had so far? So the bot was actually able to, handle that whole thing, handle that whole flow, changing somebody's name. But at the end of that call, in signing off, said, "Oh, and congratulations on your marriage." Right? That's something that you could have coded that interaction, right, with a more flow-based model, but you'd have been forever defining these tiny little hooks all over the application to have these personalized experiences. You get a lot of that kind of for free with the LLM. But of course, with it comes concerns, right? Hallucination is kind of this phrase that you'll have heard possibly when looking at this. So this is, what are the chances that my bot's going to say something that I don't want it to say? It's kind of never been easier to get the bot to do the things you want it to do, but now it's getting really hard to get it to not do the things you don't want it to do. You've kind of got control over much more things, but it's harder to control, right? That's the trade-off. So we've got to have a load of really, really strong mechanisms in there to block certain topics from being discussed, to also block callers who are maliciously trying to get your bot to do things that you don't want it to do. And that's really, really important, especially for anybody that's in that kind of enterprise space, or whether in a high profile position as an organization where, giving this idea of having the non-predefined responses going to your callers can be a little bit scary. So that's kind of an area that we work very, very closely on. We have a kind of a model which has multiple layers to try and prevent any of those issues occurring at sort of any layer of that stack. So as I said before, we talked about this looking deceptively simple, but you can see there's a huge number of components that go into this. And one that I haven't mentioned yet at all is connecting it to the actual phone system as well. And that's obviously where a partner like Amillan will come in to be responsible for things like the SIP telephony, to be responsible for the cloud migration of your telephony platform, perhaps. You can use their expertise to handle the telephony aspects of things, and then hook into us via SIP typically to handle the AI aspects of the contact center. So one of the other things that people perhaps don't think is immediately obvious, but I think is super helpful when you've got a system like this in, is that you are essentially recording and transcribing everything that the customer is saying to you up front on the call. And customers will, when they're presented with a customer-led voice assistant, will respond really, really naturally. We measure this. We measure how many words people actually use when they talk to us. And because it sort of understands context, people will elaborate. They will give a little bit more of their story. They won't just say the two words, complaints department. They'll tell you what's wrong. Hey, I received this parcel and it was damaged. Right? Okay, great. That's actually really, really valuable data operationally, right? So what we do is we extract common themes from the transcripts of the things that people are talking about, and we can report back on those, and we can cluster those so that we can turn around to you as a business and say, hey, do you know that you have an uptick in people that are calling about this particular type of complaint? Or if you're a more regionalized business, do you know you have more complaints coming in about this particular location? Do you know you have more requests for a vegetarian menu in certain locations than you do in others? Is that information that is relevant to you as an organization? And dependent on your industry, that might even tell you problems that you have within your own tech, right? So we work with a bank that occasionally had, a few years ago, had some issues with logins to their application in certain circumstances. We're able to actually tell them when they're seeing an uptick in people reporting those login complaints. Really, really powerful to be able to give that information back from what was perhaps before just seen as this telephone system that didn't really spit out anything super useful other than number of calls that we'd had and HT. So a couple of examples here for how people have used that. We work with a global logistics company, and they were able to identify how many people were calling in requesting pickups in certain areas and use that to adjust their business processes to actually allow more people to come and pick up parcels in certain locations based on the demand that they were seeing. We've also seen people in the restaurant industry, we're deployed in over 1,000 restaurants in the UK, where people are calling in and asking for a table of a certain size at a certain time, and we were having to say, no, sorry, we're full, we don't have tables of that particular configuration at that time. Well, we've been able to report back on all of that excess demand and allow those restaurant chains to actually reconfigure their spaces a little bit, telling them where it would make sense to do so to actually increase their restaurant revenue. Again, something that you wouldn't have thought you'd be able to drive purely from telephone data in the past, but having that AI running over the top of it gives you the ability to really analyze every single call and look for patterns and trends within them. So as Katrina says, by the way, in the chat, if anybody does have any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A and we'll try and get to them either as we're going along or towards the end of the presentation. But one of the common questions that we get is around, how do I get started, right? How do I get started with something like this? And as I mentioned before, the first step is really to get the telephony hooked up. So we'll have the, we'll get that working so that the calls are routing into us. The calls will then be analyzed. We'll start to route them and on they go, right? And we've basically replaced the IVR with something more powerful at this point. But the next step after that is looking for what are the frequently asked questions? What are the topics that we think don't require masses of integration that we can just answer? So if I'm a hotel, if I'm operating a chain of hotels and I find that I have a lot of people calling up to speak to reception and I ask them, hey, why do you want to speak to reception? They say, I want to know about, is there any parking at this particular location and do I have to pay for it? Well, that's not really a great use of that customer advisor's time, right? That's simply something that we can help the customer to self-serve by giving them that information in the same voice over the phone almost immediately. So FAQs become the next thing that we want to look at, and a bot typically would start with 30 to 50 FAQs within a virtual agent, and then see what happens from there, really. See what's working, what's containing, what's not, what additional FAQs do we need to add. And we can support channel shifting there as well, right? So if somebody says, hey, I'd like some more information about the restaurant in your particular hotel. Okay, cool. We can read that all out, or we can offer to send a text message or send a WhatsApp message to that caller and say, hey, would you like us to send a message containing this information, or sending a link to the website where you can grab that information and maybe book for the restaurant. So we can support that channel shift as well over to those sort of more digital channels that people are looking for as well. We then start to add on things like partial automation. So that might be, how do I take some of the call and shorten it? How do I reduce the AHT for my human agents who are sat behind it? So things like, can I pre-authorize that caller, use natural language to ID and V them? Maybe I can help start off a few troubleshooting steps in a more sort of tech-based contact center. Maybe I can log into somebody's account, maybe let them know about outstanding orders, that type of thing, prior to escalation to a human agent. And again, that's where you'd want to, we'd want to work with you and work with Amillan. How do we actually pass that data back into the human agent as well? So are they going to get the right screen pop that's going to tell them exactly what's taken place so far with the virtual agent? Is this caller already authenticated, etc.? All of that information we want to pass through where possible to keep that AHT down and make the human agents that are sat behind this thing as efficient as possible as well. And then phase 3, we get into advanced automation, and this is where people are looking at those more end-to-end flows. So for example, maybe that's somebody who's calling up a retailer and asking for a price match. This is something we do with a large retailer in the US where the call comes in and we're integrated with all of the systems in the background, the CRM, the inventory management system, the payments platform, to actually completely handle that end-to-end. And that might be going through validation. It might be then checking is a refund available and processing that refund for the caller. Now, when we get into that level of advanced automation, the sky's kind of the limit in terms of where we can go. It really comes down to what APIs and what systems do you have available, and that will of course come down to where people are on their sort of transformation journeys. So I'm going to get into the FAQs and just I'm going to get into the Q&A in just a second. But just to sort of summarize what PolyAI are doing, and again, thank you for the opportunity, Kevin and team, to allow me to talk about what we do today. But where we are, we build really natural virtual agents. We've got a ton more examples on our website, which we'd be happy to share with you as well. Please feel free to pop on there and find it. With really best-in-class understanding, I still think no matter how good these things are going to sound, it's super, super important. It's probably the most important thing is that we correctly understand the caller. So that's where we focus a lot of our effort. That's super accurate intent detection. We have our own professional services team who are heavily specialized in this sort of technology. Most of them are polyglots themselves. They speak multiple languages. We have linguists, we have conversational designers all on the team, and they'll all be involved in making these things sound as absolutely natural as possible, which in turn leads to that super, super high engagement. And then, as we've mentioned earlier on, little to no training data required, right? We train these things in much the same way that we train a human agent. We give it knowledge, and we give them knowledge, and then we give them the tools to do their job. The only difference is instead of giving them a login to the CRM, in this case, we have an API that's going to give us that same access. We're going to build custom dashboards. So again, we get that real-time data and insights out of the platform. And then we iterate really, really, really quickly. So fast updates, look at the data. What are people actually calling about? How do we optimize? How can we A/B test a lot of these things as well and find out what's working for our particular demographics? And then finally, perhaps slightly less relevant in the UK, but as we think about wider Europe and the rest of the world, giving companies the ability to offer more multilingual support. So again, that same retailer that I talked about in the US expanded into Spanish for the US-based Spanish-speaking population, and then have expanded into Canadian French as well to support their customers north of the border. And again, we have bots that are multilingual. I think our most multilingual bot at the moment is speaking 16 languages and is live in 20 plus countries. So those are sorts of things that we can do once we've got these things up and running, once we've got a virtual agent talking to the customers, and once we start to understand the sorts of queries and demands that are coming in. And that's the end of the presentation. I think I'm going to invite Kevin back up onto the screen with me, and then we'll have a quick look at some of those questions as well.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, that was great. There are a number of questions that's come up, so maybe we can run through those one by one. Are you reading them as well, Adam, or do you want me to read them out?
Yeah, I'm just scanning them now. So great. So thanks for all the questions. So what is the feedback from customers? Yeah, so great, really good question. I think it varies, and I think the reason I give a bit of a nuanced answer here is that I think some customers start with a preconceived bias against automation. And I think as consumers, we're probably all guilty of this. We've had bad experiences with poor automation. So we have kind of expectations that things aren't going to work. So we sometimes see a little bit of apprehension at first, which is why that building the trust is super, super important early on in the call. But when we talk about like feedback on the solution more generally, we're looking at, from the client's perspective, we're looking at a few things. We're looking at the AHT reduction. So it can actually mean that the same number of humans can handle more calls in a day because they're shorter, they are things have already been done for them. The IDMV is being done, for example. Misroutes are being minimized because calls are getting through to the right team first time, helping with the first contact resolution as well. Others have seen just huge decreases in volume of calls offered to the queues. So if I think about the global logistics company, they see sort of high percentages of containment, 60% plus containment on a lot of topics, which has of course reduced massively demand going into the call center queues. In their case, they were actually using a lot of BPOs as well, so they're outsourcing a lot of their overflow calls. So there's a direct sort of commercial benefit to them in not having to send as many of those calls back out of the contact center again. Mm-hmm. What I would say though, and it maybe is a little counterintuitive, that the number of calls that are coming through will be reduced, but the calls that are coming through are probably the more complex ones. So a lot of the really simple stuff is getting handled by the bot. So it can mean that there's a little bit of sort of shaping. So when you're forecasting, there's a little bit of a change that goes on. We might see more of those longer, more complex calls coming through, and fewer of the simple ones. So I think a lot of agents actually prefer that, because they would rather be getting stuck into some interesting problems rather than doing the same, highly repetitive FAQ type responses all day long. But it's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, just to add to your answer there, Adam, one thing that we see quite a bit of, and a number of customers where they struggle to get certain agents to come in at work at certain times, and these tend to be companies that need people working on bank holidays, or need people in and increase staff over Boxing Day, and those sort of, which is always difficult to get people to work on those sort of events. Using something like AI allows us to sort of actually, keep that 24/7 on, and enable people to work on those days where it's always hardest to get staff. So back to, a 24/7 type organization where, we can answer calls, any time of day and night. So it allows us to be far more efficient.
Yeah, I think it kind of comes on to the second question there, which is around the productivity increasing as a result of introducing the AI. So certainly the idea of being able to expand service times, being able to expand that service offering is huge. I think within the hospitality space, we see the idea of, if somebody's calling up at 4 o'clock in the morning to book a table, great, let's take that booking, right? The AI is quite happy to do that. Whereas before they might have been met with an answer machine, which is then taking somebody out of the first hour of their day when they do come in to go and respond to all of those calls, things like that. Not all call centers, of course, are service centers, right? A lot of them are revenue generating as well. Pardon me. So I think it's always that's always worth looking at as well. We work with some more sales based contact centers where a missed call is a potential missed sale, and therefore the actual the bottom line of how much money can that contact center make is improved by answering as many calls as possible. And again, if the AI can be taking those calls and booking revenue from some of the simpler scenarios, freeing up those agents to have those higher value conversations, then that's pretty strong as well. More challenging questions, yeah. So this is one of the things that we talk about with customer-led voice assistants. Allowing the customer to ask questions mid-flow is really, really important, right? I think if you think about traditional flowchart-based approaches, they don't allow the customer to change topic halfway through. They don't allow them to ask questions halfway through a flow. But with PolyAI, we do. So an example of that, if you're running through a car insurance quote, right? A really simple example might be going through, okay, where do you park the vehicle? Is it your own? Are you the registered keeper, or all of that sort of thing? And you might have a question about something like halfway through that. You might actually, I'm in a shared driveway. Does that count as, I have this one all the time. What does that count as? I need a bit of information on the definitions of those things. And that can really, really trip up a very, very basic system. Whereas we use an approach called floating questions. So this is where we have a sort of an FAQ that can be asked at any point within that process. We'll jump out, we'll answer that query, and then we'll jump back to exactly where we need to be within that flow. And that's something that we can do much better now with technology as it is at the moment. Taking notes about the conversation, yeah. So we absolutely do take notes. Special occasions, the example that you have given there, Felix, is exactly a really good example of that. We can also summarize the entire conversation and send that to a CRM, or send that to a ticketing system. So I'm working with a retailer at the moment, and when they have complaints, they want to take a bunch of notes about what the problem has been with the delivery, and have a ticket created in their ticket management system. So we summarize the entire conversation, and we load that in as a comment within that ticket as well. So we can transcribe all of that. We can condense it, because we don't probably want to be sending the whole conversation into that. It could be quite verbose. So instead, we summarize and we fill in the required fields. That could be a table management system. It could be a CRM. It could be a ticketing system, and we'll happily work with those. And that very neatly leads me on to the final question, which is about transferring it to an agent. Do they have a summary of the conversation that the customers had before? Yes, they can do. So it depends on the contact center platform and what it supports. But if it supports screen pops, for example, we can pop that information into a screen pop. Or alternatively, if you've embedded your contact center into CRM, then we can obviously populate the CRM with that information, so that when the call is opened up, that CRM record would appear as well. But it really depends on what you're looking to achieve, and obviously the tech stack that you've got in place at the moment. And they're not all sort of built equally. Some of them have got more elaborate capabilities than others, but something we'd love to have a chat with you about.
Yeah, Adam, there's one final question just come in. Actually, it basically talks about, when terms and conditions change, and I guess this is looking at sort of restaurants and food, etc. So, if a minimum spend has maybe changed from £30 and it's gone up to £40, how easy is it to change those terms and conditions from an AI perspective with us doing?
Yeah, pretty straightforward. So we would, in that scenario, that minimum spend would be defined within the bot in something we call agent configuration. So there'll be a place for an operational user. It doesn't have to be a technical user to go in and make that change within the system. Or if that figure is being driven by the table management system, we can of course just update dynamically based on an API integration as well. But yeah, pretty straightforward to retrain the bot. You're not looking at month-long deployment cycles for these things. We have bots that are being deployed 3, 4, 5 times a day as changes occur within businesses. It's not a problem at all.
And one other question that came in was talking about how easy it is to connect to different platforms out there, different contact centers, etc., and how we would integrate the solutions.
Yeah. So again, depends on what you've got, right? If you have a system that is already SIP capable, and if it's already in the cloud, then it's pretty straightforward, and we've got some pretty straightforward out of the box configuration guides for some of the key ones that are out there. If you're still on-prem, then we can still work with, if you have SBCs that allow external SIP connectivity, we can work with that. If we have to, we can do it the good old-fashioned way, and we can forward calls back and forth with the PSTN as well. So there are always ways around connectivity. So wherever you are on that sort of cloud or CCaaS migration journey, we can likely work with you. And one of the really nice things about that as well is you can implement this still while you're on-prem, and then take the virtual agent with you when you eventually make that migration over to a CCaaS platform as well. So it can help. It can actually help in making that transition. And as far as your customers are concerned, they're talking to the same bot they were talking about before. The agents are just logged into a different platform in the background.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's sort of, unless there's any more questions that anyone wants to quickly put on the chat.
There was one in the Q&A.
Okay, Katrina, go ahead.
Now I've got to read it. You've put me on the spot, haven't you? Can you assist in building an ROI and soft benefits to present to the business?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something that we'd work together on with Amillan. But we have a value consulting part of the team, so we're able to help build out those ROI models, looking at things like the fully loaded cost of the agents, looking at the tooling costs, taking into account some of the softer benefits as well, right? So what difference is this going to make to your supervisor costs? What difference is this going to make to your training and onboarding? And we've got models that build out that ROI. What I would say in terms of ROI, we are almost always looking at a within year ROI. We're not looking at things needing to be live for 5 years to pay for themselves with this sort of technology. In many cases, we're sort of 6 months to a year, and we're already paying for ourselves, and then into the kind of expansion phases. So we've got all of those models. Please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to introduce you to the value consulting team on our side as well, and work together with Amillan to get those built out.
Yeah, and just to add to that, from Adam, if anyone on the audience, if there's some serious interest here, just let us know, and we'll put something together, and we'll start that early business consultancy. What we try and do here is look for the real pains and needs to start with, and building the AI engine around those, and then development as we move forward into other areas of the business. So, and as Adam says, we normally see a return on investment very, very quickly on these sort of solutions, and not always in agents, in reducing agents, but a lot of it can be. We've seen hotel groups where they've taken us on board to the extent that they used to pass calls through to the groups when the contact centre shut, maybe at 8 o'clock in the evening or 7 o'clock in the evening, and then pass them through to local hotels, which happens to be when the hotels are at their busiest, so calls don't get answered, and there's revenues lost. So there's always something in an organisation where this can really assist, increase sales, save costs, and increase interactions with the end users as well. I think on that note, if there's no other questions, we'll follow up, and if there is any real interest, we can get together and look at next stages. But on that note, I think thanks for everyone for attending. I hope you found it useful, and we'll follow up with more snippets and more information around AI and other areas that we can help your businesses with moving forward. Adam, I don't know if there's any last words from yourself.
No, just thank you for having me on, and it's been great to have a chat with everybody, and likewise, any questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks a lot.
Well, thanks all, and enjoy the rest of the day. Cheers for now.